Since it was my New Year's resolution to emigrate to Canada, on New Year's Day I wrote to Graham, the Canadian lawyer I met on the beach in Corfu, and asked him if he'd sponsor me. I enclosed a photo just in case he'd forgotten who I was. But within a couple of weeks, and true to his word, he responded with an official letter on Blake, Castles and Graydon Stationery, stating that I was being offered a secretarial position at this prestigious law firm. I was thrilled that he'd remembered his offer, and I thanked him profusely. With this letter, I was now able to apply to emigrate to Toronto. So I contacted the Canadian Embassy in London and made an appointment for an interview at the end of January. As I waited for the bus to London at the Coventry bus station, I stood next to a small woman who was wearing leg braces. Her hands were crippled with arthritis. She was blind and wore hearing aids. She rocked back and forth singing, "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." I thought she was strange, so I moved away from her. When the bus came, I hurried on and found a seat at the back next to the window. Then, as the strange lady walked along the aisle, I was thinking, please don't let her sit next to me. Well, guess what? She did. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me. She changed my life. Her name was Karina, and although she looked older, she was actually only 28. We talked for the whole 4-hour journey, and I learnt more about how this beautiful soul had suffered in her life. Yet she was happy and had such a wonderful attitude. She told me that she was born with rickets, which affected the proper growth of her bones due to a lack of vitamin D and calcium. But she did have her sight. However, at the age of 6, she'd fallen over a milk crate at school and damaged her right eye on the sharp corner of the crate, resulting in the loss of that eye. She lost the sight in her other eye and the partial loss of her hearing when, at the age of 8, unbelievably, she fell out of a moving car. This extraordinary woman told me that her parents kept her sheltered and did everything for her. She said they seemed ashamed of her and wanted to keep her hidden. Consequently, it was difficult for her to adapt to being blind in the outside world, especially with her other physical disabilities. Then, when she was 18, Karina made the announcement that she was going to a special facility in North Wales where she could learn to function and live as a blind person. But this determined young woman went beyond adapting to being blind. She also decided to study law. The only problem was that not many of the journals and textbooks were in Braille, so she relied on volunteer readers supplied by the National Institute for the Blind. I asked her if I could do that, and she said, "Of course, we're always needing readers." So within a few weeks, I'd registered and was reading books not only to Karina, but to other non-sighted individuals. It made me happy knowing I could make a difference in their lives. But it was really they who made a difference in mine. I have many stories about this period in my life, but I need to move on. Before I do, though, I must tell you more about the bravery and courageousness of Karina and other people I met. She'd recently been accepted at a college for the disabled in Coventry, but because she was the only blind student there, she told me how difficult it was for her to get around. She'd called me on the phone to ask if I could meet her at the college because she needed me to read something she'd typed. I met her at the appointed place, and she took my hand and said, "I'll show you around." She's blind. We walked along a pathway, and then Karina turned right, and I tried to stop her, as I could see that we were heading straight for a brick wall. She put her hand out and felt the wall. "Yes, this is it." I couldn't quite understand what she was doing, but it soon became clear when she told me that on her first day she practically ran into this wall and just couldn't find a way around it. She said she clawed at the wall in frustration, and her misshapen arthritic fingers and hands were bleeding and painful, but she was determined to find a way around the wall. Eventually someone came along and led her into the college. I was angry. I needed to do it myself, she said. We continued up steps into the main entrance and along a corridor where Karina pointed out various classrooms and the subjects she studied there. Then she pushed through a double door at the end of the corridor. This is the kitchen. Come and meet my friends. As we entered, it took me a while to adjust to the various assortment of physical disabilities affecting the young people in the room there. There were probably 6 or 7 people there. Many of their limbs had not been fully developed because their mothers had taken the drug thalidomide during their pregnancies to alleviate morning sickness, but with devastating results. A handsome young man with long dark hair and a beard was sitting on a metal table and with a big smile said, "Hi, Karina, who's your friend?" She introduced me and I went to shake his hand, but it was attached to his elbow, as was the other hand. Nevertheless, we did shake hands. That's when I noticed that he wasn't actually sitting on the table. He was standing. His feet were in a nice pair of black leather shoes, but his legs were hardly there. That's why I thought he was sitting. It's hard to describe. But what I noticed in this room, just as years later when I was casting developmentally disabled people for Rain Man, these people were very special indeed. I could really see them. They were individuals with hearts and souls, and they all had distinctive personalities. Most of all, I greatly admired and respected their minds, for here they were at college, studying to make more of themselves. Yet Karina and all of these special people who I had the pleasure of meeting and knowing taught me a big lesson. They never gave up. They didn't let their disability define them. They believed in themselves. They didn't allow walls to stop them from becoming the wonderful human beings they were meant to be. Most of all, they didn't judge others. Whereas I'm ashamed to say that I'd made a judgment about Karina because she looked and acted different, and I didn't want her sitting next to me on the bus. Oh, but what a loss for me that would have been. She was a true blessing, another angel in my life who became more than a teacher to me. Karina was a supportive friend, especially in the days to come. The day after I returned from London, I told my mother that my application had been accepted by the Canadian Embassy and I would be emigrating to Toronto. Naturally, she was upset, but because my mother's first position was anger, she blew up and more or less told me to go and never come back. We had a terrible row, and I left the house and moved in with an aunt. On that day, Monday, my 17-year-old brother John developed a chest cold which turned into pneumonia, resulting in his death 4 days later and 3 weeks before his 18th birthday. As you can imagine, it was a devastating time for the whole family, and especially for my mother. "It's like losing a limb," she said. I thought, yes, a child will always be part of its mother. My younger brother Peter, who was 14 and a diabetic since the age of 2, reacted to John's death by saying he didn't want to take his insulin injections. "What's the point?" he said. My maternal grandfather, Cliff, who also lived with us, was in the early stages of dementia, and his behaviour was unpredictable. In the book I'm writing, I've given more details of this very sad time. But for now, I'll say that it was particularly difficult for my mother. How can a mother ever survive the loss of a child at any age? Next time, big decisions and family responsibilities. Thank you for listening.